The temperature drops, the darkness comes, the weak don't survive. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, Scandinavian settlers in northern Sweden, Norway, and Finland faced the polar night. 6 months of complete darkness, where temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees Fahrenheit and howling winds reached 60 miles per hour. Entire families were trapped inside their homes for weeks, buried under 15 feet of snow, with no contact with the outside world. These settlers needed structures that could withstand crushing snow loads exceeding 50 pounds per square foot, approximately 240 kilograms per square meter, while maintaining interior temperatures warm enough to prevent death from hypothermia. They required building techniques that created airtight seals using only hand tools and forest materials. Most critically, they needed heating systems that could burn continuously for months without igniting the structure or filling it with deadly smoke. Every joint mattered. One poorly fitted log could create a thermal bridge that would freeze the interior solid within hours. One inadequate foundation could allow ground frost to heave the entire structure apart. One structural failure could collapse the roof under snow load, crushing everyone inside. The families who survived generations of polar nights had perfected construction techniques that maximized thermal efficiency while using only axes, adzes, and wilderness materials. They created joints that became tighter over time as the wood aged and settled, and heating systems more efficient than modern homes. But which specific techniques were essential for polar night survival? How did each method serve multiple functions that justified the enormous labor investment? What engineering principles allowed these cabins to maintain livable temperatures using only wood-burning heat? From timber in the forests to stone in the mountains, every culture built to survive. This is Timber and Stone. Site selection and foundation, engineering against frost heave. Picture a father standing in knee-deep snow, his breath forming ice crystals in the -20 degrees Fahrenheit air. His children wait back at the temporary shelter, but he knows this decision will determine whether they see spring. Choose wrong, and months of work will fail as spring thaw lifts and tears the ground beneath. Experienced builders sought gentle south-facing slopes that captured maximum solar radiation during the brief daylight hours. Natural windbreaks from prevailing northern winds were essential, along with access to running water that wouldn't freeze solid. So, how could they tell if the ground would stay stable when frost penetrated 6 feet deep? Fathers and sons dug test holes to examine soil composition and drainage. Sandy or gravelly soils drained well and resisted the frost heaving that could tear apart clay foundations. They dug 3-foot test pits. If water lingered, spring thaw would turn it to ice that shifts stones and dooms the build. Smart builders excavated 3 to 4 feet below the expected frost line, removing every scrap of organic material that could rot and create settling. The excavation stretched 2 feet wider than the planned cabin footprint on all sides, space for drainage trenches filled with gravel that would carry away spring snowmelt. Imagine the labor, a man and his teenage sons moving tons of frozen earth with wooden shovels and iron bars, racing against approaching winter storms. Their hands cracked and bled, but they couldn't stop. Not when their wife and mother already showed signs of the lung sickness that claimed so many during the dark months. Builders selected granite or schist blocks weighing 200 to 500 pounds each, positioning them with wooden levers and rope systems to create a perfectly level platform. These stones could bear loads that would overload many modern light foundations, the weight of massive log walls plus tons of snow pressing down from above. 6-inch gaps between stones allowed air circulation that prevented moisture buildup under the cabin floor. Moving these foundation stones required ingenious techniques passed down through generations. Families used wooden rollers cut from straight pine logs, rolling stones across frozen ground, while children ran ahead, placing the next roller in line. Lever systems made from hardwood poles could lift stones weighing more than 3 men, positioning them with precision that modern machinery would struggle to match. The leveling process was critical. Even a half-inch variance could create stress points that would crack under load. Builders used water-filled wooden bowls as primitive levels, adjusting stone positions until water remained perfectly still in all directions. Smaller stones served as shims, driven into gaps with wooden mallets until the entire foundation platform was absolutely level. Massive sill logs measuring 12 to 14 inches in diameter, approximately 30 to 35 centimeters, formed the first structural elements. Builders hewed the sill logs flat on both faces with broadaxes, creating surfaces that sat perfectly level on the foundation stones. The hewing technique required incredible skill. Each axe stroke had to remove exactly the right amount of wood to create surfaces flat enough that no gaps remained when logs were positioned. Corner joints locked these sill logs together using complex notching that prevented air infiltration, joints stronger than modern steel brackets. The saddle notch with shoulder technique created mechanical connections that actually tightened as the wood dried and shrank over time. Builders carved precise shoulders that would prevent joints from opening, even as the logs settled under the enormous weight of the completed structure. Without these foundations, all their work would collapse by February. Now came the real test: building walls that could lock together like a wooden fortress. Wall construction, the science of thermal mass. A mother watches her husband and brothers raise the third course of logs, each timber weighing over 300 pounds. Her infant sleeps against her chest, and she knows that every gap between these logs could mean her baby won't survive the winter. There's no room for error when darkness lasts half the year. Builders selected Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris, trees that had grown slowly in harsh conditions, creating dense wood with tight growth rings. These logs measured 10 to 12 inches in diameter, approximately 25 to 30 centimeters, and 20 to 25 feet in length, with minimal taper and no major knots that could create weak points. Trees felled during the coldest winter months contained minimal sap, reducing moisture content and making the logs lighter for transport. Families spent entire days preparing each timber. Children played nearby while parents debarked and hewed each log, their axes ringing through the forest. Everyone understood that their skill with these tools would determine survival through the coming darkness. Builders stripped bark using draw knives, removing every trace of cambium that could harbor insects or promote decay. Then came the critical hewing, using broadaxes to create flat surfaces on two sides of each log. These surfaces had to fit together tighter than modern construction joints, minimizing air gaps that could let in killing cold. The real puzzle was creating joints so tight that Arctic wind couldn't penetrate. Scandinavian builders mastered the Swedish cope, where each log bottom was scribed and carved to match the exact contours of the log beneath it. This created joints with maximum surface contact and zero air infiltration. Builders used compass-like tools to trace the profile of the lower log onto the upper log, accounting for every irregularity in the wood surface. Following the scribed line with sharp axes and chisels, they carved grooves that fit perfectly over the lower log. The fit was so precise that chinking wasn't needed at build time. Later, hairline settlement gaps were packed with clay and moss. Picture the concentration required. One slip of the axe, one miscalculation, and weeks of work would be ruined. The father's hands shook from cold and exhaustion, but he maintained perfect precision. His daughter was already coughing, and even the smallest gap could let in the cold that would take her before spring. Corner construction used dovetail notches that prevented logs from separating under lateral forces from wind loading and thermal expansion. Each log end was cut with a flared profile that locked into a matching groove in the perpendicular log. These mechanical connections grew stronger as the wood dried and tightened, joints that could outlast the families who built them. Builders drove wooden pins through logs at regular intervals to prevent shifting during construction. Made from hardwood and driven into pre-drilled holes slightly smaller than the pin diameter, these created friction fits that held for centuries. Where settlement later opened hairline gaps, families packed clay and moss chinking as a seasonal tune-up. Applied from both inside and outside, this created thermal breaks that prevented cold air infiltration. The thermal performance was remarkable. 10-inch, 25 centimeters, log walls provided R12.5 insulation, but the real magic came from thermal mass. These thick logs stored heat during the day and released it slowly at night, like giant wooden batteries. These walls could withstand Arctic winds that would shatter glass, but overhead, tons of snow were already beginning to fall. Roof system, engineering for extreme snow loads. The eldest son looks up at the massive ridge beam his father is positioning, a single log weighing nearly half a ton. One mistake could crush them both. But without this beam, the roof will collapse under the first heavy snowfall, burying his sleeping siblings alive. Ridge beams measuring 14 to 16 inches in diameter could support snow loads that would collapse modern roofs. These single logs, supported at each end by gabled walls and at intermediate points by vertical posts, transferred enormous loads directly to the foundation. Fresh snow weighs 5 to 10 pounds per cubic foot, but wind-packed snow reaches 30 to 40 pounds per cubic foot, the equivalent of several cars parked on your roof. Builders spaced rafters 16 inches on center, approximately 40 centimeters, using logs measuring 6 to 8 inches in diameter. Each rafter was notched where it met the ridge beam and wall plate, creating positive connections that prevented sliding under load. Rafters extended 18 to 24 inches, approximately 45 to 60 centimeters, beyond the wall line to protect log walls from rain and snowmelt. Overhangs that could shed water like modern gutters. Families worked together on this critical phase. Fathers and sons handled heavy structural work, while mothers and daughters prepared specialized waterproofing materials. Everyone understood that a single leak could soak bedding and clothing, creating hypothermia conditions that would kill long before spring. The real puzzle was smoke evacuation without bleeding heat. Roof sheathing came from split logs laid perpendicular to rafters, creating solid decks that could support massive snow loads. Builders split logs using wooden wedges and mauls, creating flat surfaces that fit tightly together. Splits were positioned bark side down to shed water and prevent cupping as wood dried. Waterproofing relied on birch bark, Betula pendula, harvested in large sheets during late spring when bark separated easily. Families laid bark in overlapping courses like shingles, each course overlapping the one below by at least 6 inches. Wooden battens nailed through bark into sheathing held everything in place. Harvesting required perfect timing. Bark came from trees 8 to 12 inches in diameter during high sap flow. Removed in spiral strips, these could be unrolled into sheets measuring 3 to 4 feet wide by 6 to 8 feet long. This natural waterproofing was more effective than modern tar paper. The living roof came next, 2 courses of sod cut from the forest floor. First course went grass side down directly on birch bark, while the second course went grass side up to create a roof that would grow and thicken over time. Sod pieces measured 12 inches by 18 inches and 3 to 4 inches thick, cut from areas with dense grass growth and minimal weeds. Imagine the mother watching her husband and sons, carefully laying each piece of sod. This living roof would protect her children against howling winds and crushing snows. The weight, several tons, pressed down like a giant hand, but this pressure sealed every joint and made their shelter stronger than modern construction. Drainage came from gutters carved from split logs, positioned along roof edges and sloped to carry water away from foundations. Supported by wooden brackets, these led to downspouts made from hollowed logs. Without proper drainage, ice dams could form and force water back under roofing materials. With the shell secured, the hardest problem remained, staying warm without suffocating. Heating system, mastering thermal dynamics. The youngest child shivers in her mother's arms as her father builds the central hearth. She doesn't understand that this circle of stones will determine whether she survives her first polar night. Get the ventilation wrong, and carbon monoxide will silently kill the entire family in their sleep. Builders positioned circular fire pits measuring 4 to 5 feet in diameter in the exact center of cabin floors, maximizing heat distribution to all areas. They lined these with flat stones that could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles without cracking. Each stone was tested by heating in smaller fires. Stones that cracked or showed thermal stress were rejected. Only granite or schist that passed these tests got shaped with hammers and chisels into flat surfaces that fit tightly together. Smoke management balanced ventilation with heat retention through carefully designed roof openings measuring 18 to 24 inches square. Positioned to align with prevailing winds, these created proper draft while minimizing heat loss. Wooden dampers could be adjusted to control airflow and prevent downdrafts. Families had to master the delicate balance between ventilation and heat retention. Too little airflow meant suffocation from carbon monoxide. Too much meant freezing as precious heat escaped through the roof opening. Children learned to wake automatically when fires needed tending, understanding that letting flames die meant everyone would freeze. Fuel management meant understanding burning characteristics of different wood species. Hardwoods like birch and oak provided long-burning coals that maintained heat overnight, while softwoods like pine and spruce gave quick heat for cooking and rapid warming. Families stored fuel inside cabins in quantities sufficient for several days of continuous burning. Dense stone acted as a heat battery, charging by day, releasing warmth for 8 to 12 hours. A properly built hearth could store enough thermal energy to keep a family warm through the longest polar nights, even when outside temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Air circulation patterns were carefully engineered to maximize heating efficiency. Warm air rose from the central hearth and spread along the low ceiling, then cooled and descended along the walls, creating continuous circulation that distributed heat evenly throughout the small space. The central location ensured that no corner of the cabin remained cold, while the low ceiling height minimized the volume of air that needed heating. Fire management became a precise science during the polar night. Families learned to read their fires like modern thermostats, adjusting fuel size and type to maintain steady temperatures. Large hardwood logs provided base heat that lasted hours, while smaller softwood pieces could quickly boost temperatures during extreme cold snaps. The timing was critical. Add fuel too early and waste precious wood too late, and risk letting interior temperatures drop below survivable levels. Carbon monoxide prevention came through proper combustion techniques and adequate ventilation. Complete combustion required maintaining proper air supply and using dry, well-seasoned wood that burned cleanly. The roof opening provided continuous ventilation that prevented deadly gas accumulation. Families learned to recognize the subtle signs of incomplete combustion: slight headaches, drowsiness, or changes in flame color that warned of dangerous gas buildup. Fire solved warmth. Now came the harder problem: living 6 months in a single room. Interior systems, maximizing limited space. Children slept inches above the frozen floor while parents prayed the roof joints would hold. In spaces no larger than modern bedrooms, families of 6 or 8 spent 6 months of darkness, their survival depending on every inch being used efficiently. Built-in platforms along walls, elevated sleeping areas above cold floors, and closer to warm air rising from central hearths. Builders constructed these using split logs, supported by wooden brackets attached to wall logs, creating sturdy beds that could support multiple occupants plus bedding materials. Positioned 18 to 24 inches above floor level, platforms placed sleepers in the warmest air layer while providing storage space underneath. Imagine the intimacy and tension, families crowded together in confined spaces where arguments that might be minor in summer could become deadly when there was nowhere to escape conflict. Storage systems maximized vertical space through built-in shelves, pegs, and compartments that kept essential items organized during long winter months. Builders carved shelves into wall spaces between logs, using natural gaps for storage areas. Wooden pegs driven into wall logs provided hanging storage for clothing and equipment. Food preservation meant mastering techniques that could extend storage life for months or years. Root vegetables went into wooden boxes filled with sand or sawdust that maintained proper humidity while preventing freezing. Meat was smoked and dried, then stored in sealed birch bark containers that protected against moisture and pests. Mothers carefully rationed these supplies, knowing that running out of food in February meant watching children slowly starve while snow blocked every path to the outside world. Preservation techniques included smoking, salting, and drying methods that could keep perishable foods edible through the entire polar night. Water management included containers for storing drinking water and methods for melting snow when outdoor sources froze solid. Large wooden barrels or ceramic crocks stored water collected during warmer periods, while metal containers melted snow over fires when fresh water was needed. Containers positioned near hearths prevented freezing. The water storage system had to account for the family's needs over the entire polar night. A family of 6 required approximately 3 gallons per day, approximately 11 liters, for drinking, cooking, and basic hygiene, nearly 550 gallons over the 6-month period. Storage containers were carefully maintained and rotated to prevent stagnation, with fresh snow melted daily to supplement stored supplies. Hygiene and sanitation presented unique challenges in the confined space. Families used wooden basins for washing, heating water over the central fire for weekly baths that were both luxury and necessity. Waste management required careful planning. Human waste was stored in sealed containers and removed during brief periods when weather permitted venturing outside. The alternative was disease that could kill the entire family. Tool maintenance became critical during the long isolation. Axes, knives, and other essential implements had to be kept sharp and functional, using only materials available inside the cabin. Whetstones were precious possessions, carefully preserved and used to maintain cutting edges that could mean the difference between successful repairs and catastrophic equipment failure. Ventilation control balanced fresh air needs with heat conservation through adjustable openings that provided air circulation without excessive heat loss. Small gaps between logs could be opened or closed using wooden plugs, allowing fine control over air exchange rates. During extreme cold, ventilation was minimized to conserve heat. During milder periods, increased ventilation prevented moisture buildup and improved air quality. The delicate balance of interior humidity required constant attention. Too much moisture from cooking, breathing, and melting snow could create condensation that would freeze on interior walls, while too little humidity could cause respiratory problems and make the cold feel even more penetrating. Families learned to manage this balance through careful ventilation control and strategic placement of water containers near the fire. The psychological challenge was perhaps the greatest test. Families had to maintain sanity and relationships while trapped in darkness and confined spaces for half the year. They told stories, sang songs, and created crafts to pass endless hours, but depression and cabin fever claimed many who had survived the physical challenges of construction and heating. These construction techniques created structures that maintained interior temperatures 60 to 80 degrees warmer than outside air, using only wood fuel, while withstanding snow loads and wind forces that would destroy modern frame construction. As Swedish architect Carl Malmsten observed in the 19th century, a well-built log house holds warmth like a living thing, breathing with the seasons, but never letting the cold reach the heart of the home. The Norse understood this deeply. An old saying teaches, "The house protects the body, but the hearth protects the soul." In their mythology, the world tree Yggdrasil sheltered all of creation, and these log cabins became their own world trees, sheltering entire bloodlines through the endless winter nights. The families who mastered these techniques didn't just build shelters, they created vessels of life that carried them through the longest nights, proving that human ingenuity and determination could triumph over the most hostile environments on Earth. As another Nordic saying reminds us, winter tests the wood, but spring reveals the builder. Every structure tells the story of those who refuse to surrender to the elements. Let me know in the comments what impressed you most about these polar night survivors. See you in the next episode.